readers. My name is Neil Christensen, and I, like you, am a writer. I'm the author of the novel Dark White, which you can find on Amazon.com. The Kindle version is now only 99 cents, so go over there and pick that up. Today on Writing in Real Life, we're going to do something a little bit different. My current work in progress is a noir novel, currently with the working title bishopCHURCH. You can read scenes from this novel as I revise them on my website, www.gavingale.com. Today, in honor of getting the first chapter fully posted, I'm going to do a reading of the first chapter of bishopCHURCH. So let's get ourselves ready. Cheers. Get the spectacles on, and we'll dive right in to bishopCHURCH, Chapter 1. God damn it, I said, laying my gun down on what served as my kitchen table. 2 assholes dead, and I haven't even brushed my teeth yet. I suppose that wasn't such a great yardstick. I hadn't brushed my teeth in 3 days at that point, but in my defense, I had drunk a lot of bourbon. So I imagine that would have killed anything too dangerous hanging out between my gums. Either way, it was early. Too early to be dealing with this kind of bullshit. But that didn't change anything. I still had 2 meat sacks taking up floor space in a studio apartment that was short on square feet to begin with. It was bold, bursting into my apartment like that. I had to give him that much. The door swung open without so much as a knock, and my cast iron pan hit the floor right before I did. There were no introductions, no questions, just 538 solidifying the fact that I wasn't getting my security deposit back. I opened the oven and found the .45 revolver I kept on the unused pizza stone that I got from someone for my ex and my wedding. I aimed solid and bent armed at the cabinet below the sink, then stood up and pulled the trigger 4 times. It didn't bode well for the rest of my day. I'd been happy to stay boxed up there in my place for the previous 4 days, and if I had to guess, I'd have been happy to stay another 4. I was in no hurry to head out into the over-eager world where people wanted you to take on extravagant responsibilities like showering and putting on clean clothes. My place, my little 20 by 20 cubicle, was just fine by me. And as long as I didn't have to take care of anything pressing, like disposing of 2 dead bodies, I could happily hide out there until El Jefe at the liquor store stopped delivering. That said, now I did have 2 dead bodies that I had to get rid of before they started attracting flies. It was the flies I worried about, not the smell. I didn't imagine 2 bodies could ever smell any worse than the place already did, so it was unlikely that people would complain about that. Flies, on the other hand, well, they'd certainly make a mess of the product they were cooking in the tub in the unit above mine, so I'd have to get rid of the bodies before they started attracting flies. But still in all, it would have to wait. Even in my shitty building, folks would notice someone dragging a couple of corpses out the front door at 10 in the morning. Well, probably they would. Okay. So right now you're saying to yourself, whoa, slow down there, partner. You just shot yourself a couple of intruders. You got nothing to answer for. Why don't you just call the cops and have them get rid of the bodies for you? They got teams of folks with black zipper bags and big white trucks that get rid of those dead hoodlums right quick. And you'd be right to ask those kinds of questions, seeing as you don't know me well just yet, but I'll tell you, the police, they just don't like me so much. And they like the chateau I live in even less. When the fire alarm gets pulled around here, there's no fire truck coming. And when you dial 911 on your receiver, you best not hold your breath for the man to come knocking on your door. Nope. These were my stiffs, and it was up to me to get them out of my place of residence. Since disposal would have to wait, I figured I might as well finish my coffee and try and figure out who these goons were. They were dressed nicely. Not suits or any shit like that, mind you. Just nice. Like, you know, no holes in their jeans or nothing. Clothes were clean. They had recent haircuts and were both clean-shaven. definitely not from around here. I ruled out petty burglars since I had nothing worth stealing. Hell, no one in this part of town did, except maybe the meth lab upstairs. Maybe they just had the wrong place. That's what I hoped at first, though it was unlikely. Their teeth were white and their skin was clean and clear. These weren't junkies looking to steal a score. No, they were after something specific. Since I had nothing that anyone would want, that left two possibilities. One, they mistakenly thought I had something they wanted. Or two, I was the thing they wanted. The first seemed more likely. I'm not really anything special. Hell, I've been turned down by $3 hookers. Plural, as in more than once, and I don't have to tell you how low you have to be even be soliciting someone of that profession who is in that price demographic. Getting shot down, that's a low point for anyone, let alone a graduate of Annapolis. At this point, the only thing that would make you notice me on the street was my smell. That said, I do seem to have a way of pissing folks off. It's kind of like my superpower, and probably the reason I washed out of the service. The question was it enough for someone to pay a couple of mouth breathers to off me? The answer, I suppose, was that it had never happened before, but it wouldn't surprise me either. The list of potential who's in that list was too long to pick apart without having some more information to narrow down the list. It was likely someone from a previous case. It couldn't be a current case because, well, I didn't currently have a case to work on. I knelt next to one of the assholes that had let themselves in, uninvited, and stuck my hand in his jeans pocket. In retrospect, it seems obvious that that's when someone would walk in my door. The first thing I saw were her ankles. They were, how shall I say it, nice. Shapely in nude stockings set atop slender feet and red suede heels, the left one circled by a delicate gold chain. Honestly, I'd be better off if that's all I'd seen of her. The rest just caused me problems. Holy shit, you fucking killed him! It was more of a shriek than a scream, but it had the same effect on my hangover. I looked up slowly, and honest to God, the rest almost killed me right there. Legs to the sky, barely hidden inside a light, loose-fitting red dress with black lace trim at the edges. Hips you could drive a Jaguar around, and butter-white skin dotted with caramel freckles in places that made you embarrassed to notice. She had fire-red lips that rested with a part between them that made the imagination run wild, and hair the color of roses in autumn that brushed at her shoulders in a way that gave me shivers. Well, I mean, he started it, I said. She looked at me dumbfounded. So, who is he anyway? I asked. And while we're at it, honey, who are you? You're Bishop, right? bishopCHURCH? She held out a thin slip of scratch paper. You're a PI, a private dick? I took the scrap of paper from her. It was from my ad. I have flyers all around town with tear-off tabs at the bottom with my name and number on them. No address, though, which made me wonder how she found the place. Not really, I said. The city requires a license to be a PI, and the private nature of my dick is less by my choice than others. We'll just say I'm in the category of freelance service provider. That sounds like a distinction without a difference, she said. I shrugged. I'm still waiting on your name, sweetheart, I said, and theirs. Penny, she said softly. Penny Steeler. Of course, I said, rolling my eyes at the preposterous irony. I took my hand out of the dead guy's trousers and stood up. I held the hand out to shake hers. She glanced at it, then busied herself by opening her handbag and taking out a pewter cigarette case and matching lighter. She flipped it open and drew out 2 Pall Malls, offering one to me. I took it and accepted her light. While she lit up, I walked over to the kitchen to get my coffee. We stood there looking at each other, smoking. I took a sip of coffee and spit it out in the sink. It was cold. Penny, I said. I was making eggs. Oh, no thank you, she said. I've already eaten. I took a drag on my cigarette and blew the smoke at the floor. I wasn't offering, I said. It's what I was doing when your boyfriends showed up this morning. They're not my boyfriends, she said, exhaling the smoke as she spoke. I'm not that kind of girl. I shrugged. What do I know, I said. I swirled the cold coffee around in the mug and stared at it contemplatively. After a moment, I lifted the mug and swallowed the rest down. I took the last hit of my butt and dropped the filter into the mug. It hissed and then went out. Aren't you going to offer me a seat? She asked, starting to seem annoyed. I didn't even offer you to come in, I said with as much ambivalence as I could muster. She sighed and sucked out the last of her coffin nail and crossed over to me, dropping it in my mug. Then she walked over to the body and stared down at it for a while. He's been following me, she said, still gazing at the corpse. This one, the one you were groping when I came in. I squinted at her. I wasn't... Oh, fuck it, never mind. She looked at me quizzically. For how long? I asked. Couple weeks. And the other guy? Never seen him before, she said. I put the mug in the sink and grabbed the metal folding chairs from next to the frigid air. I set them out and gestured for her to sit. Miss Steeler, I said, setting an ashtray down on the milk crate between us. What is it I can do for you? She glanced at the bodies lying on my floor. Well, she raised her eyebrows. Not much of anything now, I suppose. You were here about them? I asked. Well, him, she said, nodding at the one closest to us. Just the one, like I said. He'd been following me for a while. I wanted to know who he was, what he wanted. He was making me nervous. When I saw your sign, I thought maybe you could help. And other than him following you, you never seen him before? You don't know his name or have any idea what he wanted? Look, Mr. Church, she was anxious. I'm a good girl. I don't know what you may have heard that runs contrary to that, but it's true. I'm a good girl, and I don't have any clue as to who this man is or why he would be following me. Miss Steeler, please, Penny. I smiled my most charming smile. Penny, then. Penny, I haven't heard anything about you. I've never heard of you before, or them for that matter. Honest to God, lady, I was just trying to make some eggs for breakfast. After that, she left. She was upset, but content with the knowledge that the guy who'd been following her, whoever he was, wouldn't be following her anymore. She didn't seem to care about his motivations, as long as he was on ice. I cared, and I tried my best to persuade her to stick around and fill me in on a bit of her backstory so that I could start putting the pieces together. But the suggestion that she tell me more about herself just served to hasten her departure, and don't think for a second that that didn't make me more suspicious. Once the light clicks her heels made as she walked down the hall disappeared, I turned my attention back to the intruders still mucking up my humble abode. I still had hours before the sun would go down, and that was good because I still had lots to do if I wanted to dispose of these guests without attracting attention. First things first, though, I went back to frisking the stiffs on the off chance that they were carrying something that might help shed some light on the whole messed up situation. You try not to look in their eyes when you're sticking your hands in a dead man's pants. It just serves to make things awkward. The first guy, the one that had been tailing Penny for the past few weeks, didn't have much on him. No wallet or ID, just an old beat-up black pocket notebook with a phone number scratched into the spine. It was local, based on the NXX prefix, but I didn't recognize it. The situation with the second guy was a little worse, and by a little, I mean profoundly. He had plenty of ID on him, mostly in the form of a fancy brass badge that said FBI. Dead goons were a pain in the ass, but they were a pain in the ass I was prepared to handle. Roll them up in a rug, most likely the one they were bleeding on right now, although I really did like that rug, damn it. I knew what I had to do, and it wouldn't be the first time I'd had to do it. But a dead Fed, well, fuck. That was going to cause all kinds of problems, and the cold sweat on the back of my neck was by far the least of them. Couldn't figure it out either. Why was an agent pairing up with some local thug? Why were they following that penny girl around? And what the hell were they doing breaking into my apartment? She's getting chased around for whatever reason she wasn't inclined to share with me. She pulls a tag off one of my flyers, and before she's even gotten a chance to chat me up, I've got these two breaking down my door, guns a-blazing, and forcing me to shoot them up while I'm in my skivvies. I took my coffee mug back out of the sink and poured bourbon in it. Then I sat down on one of the folding chairs again and inspected the G-Man's badge. Special Agent Raymond Reynolds. I rubbed the shield with my thumb just to make sure it was real. Then I looked at Mr. Reynolds laying on my good rug. All right, Agent. What exactly are you doing here? I gulped down the bourbon in my mug and looked at the clock. It was 11:45 in the morning. I set the badge back down on the milk crate and ran my fingers through my hair. I'd have to get another rug. 2, really. Couldn't possibly carry them both out together. I wasn't close to that fit. So I'd have to wrap one of them up in this rug and get a second to wrap the other one. Then I'd need a new rug for my floor, if for no other reason than to cover up the blood stain that was certainly forming on the wood under the current rug. So I needed 2 new rugs and some twine to tie them up. If I played my cards right at the thrift shop, I could get the twine thrown in when I picked up the rugs. 2 rugs was going to cost me, though. I was pretty sure that I had a $1 or $2 stuffed in my pants pocket somewhere, but I'd probably have to donate some blood or something to make up the rest. I dug around in the laundry next to the bed for the cleanest pair of trousers I could find. I considered taking a shower, but decided against it since I didn't have any clean clothes to put on anyway. I ran a black comb through my hair and washed my face and pits in the sink. I found a mostly clean white button-down shirt under the television set with my black tie still knotted around the collar. I dug through the various socks on the floor trying to find something that wasn't stiff, but they were all too far gone. So I threw on my loafers over bare toes. I grabbed the paperclip that held my door and car key and my driver's license from the dish next to the door and closed the windows on my way out, so as to keep the flies at bay. First stop out the door was going to have to be the bank. For most of you, that probably means a nice brick building with well-dressed young women and effeminate men distributing new bills in small white paper envelopes. For me, though, the bank is what I call the pawn shop at the end of the street I live on. It doesn't have a vault, but it's got a cage and a sawed-off shotgun, so it's almost the same thing. They're not FDI insured, but that's okay because they don't take deposits. You can cash checks sometimes, though, for a 30% service fee. I didn't have a check to cash today, though, and I still owed on a loan I took out 9 months ago, but I needed money, so I was going back to basics. I had a pair of opal cufflinks that my ex-wife had given me on some occasion or other. I never understood why she gave me nice things. I didn't like to go anywhere nice, and I certainly never had the money to take her anywhere where nice things would be a requirement. Most of the holes I frequented, nice things had better odds of getting you mugged than raising your status. On the other hand, that's probably why she was my ex-wife and not my wife. Anyway, I had these cufflinks, and I figured even with my outstanding balance, they should be enough to get me what I needed for a couple area rugs. That's mostly how it went for me between cases. I'd get paid, then pay enough of my back rent to keep from getting kicked out of my place. Then I'd drink whatever was left. When that ran out, I'd start pawning stuff. At this point, there wasn't a lot left to sell, though. After these cufflinks, all I really had left was my watch and my wedding ring. The watch was an Omega Speedmaster, also a gift from my ex, probably in a failed attempt to get me to be on time for, well, anything, I suppose. I think it cost her a couple grand when she bought it. I'd probably be able to get $30 when the time came. I figured I could live with that. My wedding ring was platinum and circled with diamonds. If I went to a real jewelry shop, I could probably get a couple G's for it. But that wasn't going to happen. I'd never sell it. What I needed was more cases. My last gig was 4 weeks prior, and it had only paid $500. That meant I walked with $350 after the banks cut. $275 went to housing, and the other $75 bought 4 liters of Canadian Club and a stack of flyers that I tacked up to telephone poles around town, leaving me $4.27 crumpled in my slacks. The upside of this was that it was $2 more than I thought I had. The downside being that it was significantly short of what I would need to buy the rugs I needed. The flyers hadn't been much help so far, and in fact, the only thing they had led to was my dead pals currently stinking up my place, and since I was having to spend money that I didn't have to get rid of them, overall I would call it a net loss on my end. It was tough getting work without a license. There wasn't a lot of legit work in this town. Nashville isn't big enough to need dicks looking into corporate crime or missing persons. Most of the legit work is divorce stuff, and even the sleazy stuff ends up getting farmed out to guys with their city PI card. I mostly get the dregs that are left after that. A little collection duty for a couple of the less respected loan sharks. Some gigs for low-rent pimps checking in on their girls. Nothing heavy-handed, mind you. Just some shouting and waving around my piece. It's not even loaded most of the time. Bullets cost a lot of money. The work isn't regular and it pays for shit, but I take it when it comes, and when it doesn't, well, I don't need nothing 5-star. If it never rained, I wouldn't even bother keeping up on the rent. I got no one to impress. I don't love no one, and no one loves me back. Most people flat out hate me, and that's all right by me. I understand completely. I hate me too most of the time. But something keeps me climbing out of bed each day, and until it doesn't, I'll just keep doing the bare minimum I need to stay mostly drunk and technically not dead. At the end of the block, I walked into the bank. The little springy bell above the door jingled, and Bruno, the proprietor of the establishment, looked up from his sports page. When he saw me, he dropped the paper and pointed at me, shaking his head. No, no, no. No way, Church. We ain't giving out any loans today, and I ain't cashing no checks. That last one you dropped on me bounced, and the cops showed up looking for the guy who wrote it. I lost 6 customers while they sat in their black and white outside my shop all day. I put my hands up defensively and sort of half bowed in concession. I know. I'm sorry about that. Jackie told me that they came here and hassled you. I'm really sorry. I had no idea. You owe me $500, asshole, Bruno said. Whoa, Bruno. You only paid out $350. $500, motherfucker. Bruno stood up and leaned aggressively over the counter. Plus, you still owe me $2 large from that loan last November. Hey, I've paid some on that, I argued, knowing full well that I hadn't. Do you have money for me? I nodded, then shook my head. No, I don't. I'm working on it, though. I'm on a job. I've got a big payday coming at the end of this week, and I'll be able to set you straight, and in cash. He looked skeptical. Thing is, I said, I'm going to need a little capital up front. No way, he said, shaking his head. I've got collateral, I said, reaching into my slacks and producing the cufflinks. I walked up to the counter and laid them on the plexiglass surface. Bruno leaned in close and checked them out. He picked up one and slid on a jeweler's loop to inspect it. Do you even know what you're doing with that? I asked mockingly. He glared at me, then went back to the cufflink for another moment before taking the loop off. And the watch, he said. No way, I said. Come on, man. You know you're going to give it to me one of these days. You got to be running out of shit to sell me. Maybe, I said. But today is not that day. He crossed his huge arms and stared at me. Those are worth a lot, I said. You take those Give me $200 and we'll call it even for the check. Bruno let out a deep belly laugh that sounded like Santa Claus hearing a dirty joke. Church, you motherfucker, you crack me up. $50 and you still owe me juice on the bounce check. I gave him a deeply offended look, and he laughed again. You owe me a lot of money, Church. If you was anyone else, I'd already have your kneecaps hanging here on my wall. I'm not handing these jewelries back either, so take the $50 or walk out empty-handed. I looked at him with my dirtiest face, then dropped my shoulders and held out my palm for the cash. Bruno gave another chuckle and dropped the cufflinks into a cardboard box filled with mixed men's jewelry on the counter. He punched a button on the register and it clanged as the drawer slid open. He stuffed 2 20s and a $10 bill in my open hand, then slammed the register drawer closed. Now get out of here and don't come back until you have the rest of my money, asshole. I tried to give one last tough guy look, then gave up and turned and walked out of the store. $50 wasn't going to get me 2 new rugs. It wasn't going to get me 1 new rug, but it could get me a couple of shower curtains, and I could make that work. I walked the block back to my building and ducked down the alley to where I kept my car. I had an old police cruiser that had been stripped down for resale at a police auction, then stripped down again by thieves outside the owner's apartment. It was missing the radio, the heater panel, and the passenger seat. The passenger doors were crushed in and the hood was a different color than the body, but it got me from place to place when I could afford to put gas in the tank. I kept the car parked in the alley behind my building. There's a nice spot on the opposite side from the garbage dumpster that allows a clean straightaway onto the main drag. It's convenient for those times when you gotta get out of Dodge quick. Of course, it's a no parking zone, but I have my ways around that too. I bent over and unlocked the yellow boot I kept wrapped around the front driver's side tire. I picked it up a couple years back at a fire sale hosted by, probably, the same guys that stripped down my ride in the first place. I rigged the thing so it didn't need a key, so I could slap that sucker on and off at will. That coupled with a few fake parking tickets that I kept under the wipers, and I could park just about anywhere for a day or two before the cops even bothered to look twice. I drove the 3 miles to the Mega Box discount store, figuring it was the best place to find dead body wrappers. My intuition proved insightful as I found plastic shower curtains on sale for $9. I grabbed 2 of the most opaque patterns I could find and tossed them in a blue basket of the buggy. 2 curtains meant that I only spent $18 of the $54 I had on me. That meant I had time to make one more stop on the way home. Metropolitan was the liquor store closest to my place. It was a big place with lots of crazy high-end booze and fancy wines with names I couldn't pronounce. There's no real price competition in the alcohol industry in Nashville. Liquor stores are regulated by the state, so prices are more or less the same everywhere. That meant you picked your store based on proximity, not cost. Metropolitan was too nice for me, but it was close, so it was my shop. The guy that ran the place was called Hefe. That's what he was called, but his name was just Jeff. If you asked him, his name was Mad Dog, but no one was going to give him the satisfaction of calling him that. Hefe was maybe the only one in the city that was always happy to see me. "Church!" he shouted cheerfully when I walked in. I groaned and gave him a half-hearted wave. I should have been friendlier, I suppose. He was a nice old man and he treated me well. I guess I really was just a drunk asshole. I swerved my cart through the narrow aisles until I found what I was looking for. I grabbed 2 plastic jugs of Evan Williams bourbon and rolled them up to Hefe at the register. "Wow, big spender. Is today payday?" he asked with unsettling sincerity. I sighed. "Nope. Just the day I get the juice to get me there." "Hey, you're a PI, right?" "Nope," I said as cranky as I could. "Oh." He cocked his head and looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. "I thought you were a PI. I need someone to find the fucker that totaled my car. Aren't those your flyers on telephone poles all over town?" I sighed again and wiped my face with my hand, then dug a wadded-up business card out of my pocket and handed it to him with the money. Call me next week and I'll see what I can do. He frowned. You don't, need to go look for clues while they're still warm? When did it happen? This morning, he said, eyes lighting up and pointing to the back of the store. Just out back. I bagged my own booze and took my change. I'll walk out the back way and take a look before I go home, I said. Call me next week and I'll see what I can do. Thanks, Church, he said, grinning ear to ear. You're a swell guy. Seriously. I appreciate it. Oh, fuck. Cigarettes. Hefe plopped 2 packs of Pall Malls down on the counter. On the house, he said. You'll see where the ship from the accident is all over the goddamn ground out there. Thanks, I said and grabbed the smokes. Outside, I walked through the broken glass and plastic of Hefe's totaled car and climbed into my own rig. I lit a cigarette and counted my money. I had $1.97 and enough smokes and drinks to get me through the weekend. I started the car and put it in gear, then realized I'd forgotten to buy twine to wrap up the bodies. I considered going back in and asking Hefe for some, but decided I didn't want to have another conversation. I'd figure something out. Back at my building, I drove around the block a couple times to make sure there weren't any Fed types hanging around all sneaky-like. Once I was satisfied, I put the car back in the alley, locked down the boot around my tire, and grabbed the shopping bags from the back seat and headed up the back stairs. I lit up another smoke as I stepped through the door into the hallway and choked on the smoke as, predictably I suppose, there was someone waiting for me outside my apartment. This guy wasn't the same ilk as the goons this morning. He was thin and delicate looking, well dressed in a gray suit and had shiny, slicked back hair. He leaned nervously against my door jamb until he noticed me, then stood up straight, shoving his right hand conspicuously into his trouser pocket. It's been a long day, I said, approaching my door and the man standing in front of it. You bishopCHURCH? He was nervous, agitated, speaking in staccato bursts and shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It's been a long day, man. Can we maybe do this tomorrow? Do what? He asked, looking confused. I gestured at him. I don't know. Whatever it is. Whatever we're about to do. Can we do it in the morning? The left corner of his mouth dropped and he looked a little defeated. He turned his body slightly like he was going to leave, then stiffened and straightened back up. I saw his right hand ball up in his pocket and he turned back to me, his face twitching at the edges. So that's a no, I said. I want you to stay away from her. I emptied my lungs and dropped my shoulders. I'm serious, he spat. I don't know. He looked me up and down as if I was a piece of furniture he was considering buying. What she sees in you, but she's mine and we're going to work it out. You need to stay away from her. Got it? I didn't know for sure what he was talking about, but considering the day I had a pretty good idea. I glanced at his hands shaking in his pants and his face quickly becoming soaked in nervous sweat. You're gonna shoot yourself in the foot, I said. What? He said. I stuck my hand into my jacket to get my keys. The man's face went white and he jerked his right arm up, but his hand got stuck in the pocket and he lost his balance. A loud crack filled the hallway and the man howled and fell to the floor screaming. I told you so, I sighed. He was just lying there, holding his foot and screaming. I stuck my key in the door and opened my apartment. Come on, I said. Let's get inside. I'm not for sure how many gunshots it takes to get the police out here, but we have to be approaching that number now. I'll get that bandaged up for you. He looked at me helplessly, and I bent over and lifted him up and helped him hobble into my place. I set him down on one of the folding chairs and dropped the shopping bag on the floor and found the switch to turn on the lights. Then he started screaming again. I jumped at the scream and spun around to see the bony man staring at the floor in front of him. I followed his eyes to the bodies waiting to be wrapped and disposed of. Oh, them? I said, relieved. Don't worry. They're already dead. Can I get you a drink? He just sat there, moaning and shaking and staring at the floor, mumbling incoherent sounds and bleeding on the clean part of my floor. I set down 2 glasses on the wooden milk crate next to his chair and popped the cap on one of the bottles of whiskey. I filled both glasses halfway, then produced a bottle of rubbing alcohol from under the kitchen sink. I dug around next to my bed and found the cleanest undershirt I could and tore it into 3-inch wide strips. Drink up, I said with a tone of encouragement. It'll help with the pain and the shock. He looked at me with unrestrained panic and downed the firewater in one gulp, then slammed the glass down on the milk crate table for another. I refilled his glass 3/4 of the way this time, then lifted his right foot and set it in my lap. Gently, I slipped the loafer off his foot and inspected the dime-size hole that passed through the top of the shoe and the leather sole. You see, I said with a smile, that's why you carry your gun in your jacket, not your trousers. He tried to smile, but he could only manage a grimace. Don't worry, I know plenty of gents walking around with a limp for just the same reason. You're not alone. You'll excuse me if I don't find that altogether comforting. I smiled as warmly as I could muster. I surely will. I filled his glass back up with bourbon and filled the hole in his foot with isopropyl. Then I wrapped his mangled limb in the shredded undershirt parts, making sure not to use the yellowing pit-stain parts on the first layer. I went to the kitchen to wash the blood off my hands, dried them on my slacks, and lit a cigarette while I leaned against the counter. So, Twiggy McBadshot, how you feeling? Stupid, he said. Sorry. I laughed and then coughed. Hey, killer, it's your foot. I'm not that good at confrontations, he said. You don't say. What's your name, shooter? He seemed to think about this, deciding whether or not he wanted to share that information with someone like me. Devon, he said. Devon, I probed. Just Devon, he insisted, and I left it alone. All right, just Devon, I said. You want to tell me what I did to deserve you putting a bullet in me? He looked at me like a parent looks at a child who's done something wrong and really should know what that something is. I looked back at him like that child. I shrugged and dragged on my cigarette. Finally, he let out a sigh and capitulated. Penny, he said with irritation that I suspected was masking embarrassment. Oh, I said. Penny. He finished off his glass of whiskey and refilled it himself. In another 5 minutes, he wouldn't even feel the hole in his foot, or a hole in his head for that matter. I found your name and number in her pocketbook, he said. And you assumed... And I followed her, he said. This morning, I followed her here. I see, I said. He swallowed his drink and tried to stand up dramatically, but he winced at the pain in his foot and dropped back into his chair, looking angry and frustrated. I think you might have the wrong idea, I said. You have 2 corpses on the floor of your apartment, Am I supposed to just take your word for it? Hey now, I said defensively. To be fair, they were with your girlfriend. They showed up just before she did, and she knew one of them. Honestly, I have nothing to do with them whatsoever. I took a hit off my smoke. You mean, other than them being dead on your living room floor? I blew out the smoke. Well, sure, there's that. Devin shifted in his seat and looked like he was trying to come up with the words. Look, Devin, I said. Let's not get sidetracked with the dead guys. Let's try and stay focused on you, me, and that gun you've displayed such mastery of. He reached into his trousers and pulled out a shiny chrome 6-shooter and set it on the wood crate next to him. I thought you were having an affair, he groaned. Like I said, I think you have the wrong idea. He took a deep breath and for the first time looked around my place. It was small, my place was. One room. Kitchen in one corner with a sink, stove, oven, and fridge. Not much in the way of counter space. I had a little rolling cart with a cutting board that sat next to the sink. My dining room was a pace and a half from the fridge. 2 metal folding chairs and an old wooden milk crate, like the kids make race cars out of. I had a 27-inch color TV in the middle of the room sitting on a sofa tray. Across from it, where the couch should have been, was a twin mattress stacked on a 30-year-old box spring and bed frame. The phone I leased from AT&T was on the floor next to the bed with a cord stretched across the room to the jack in the kitchen. So, what's the right idea? He asked, starting to sound a little calmer. Well, I said, I'm kind of a helper of sorts. A fixer. A finder. Or a loser, if that's what's called for. Devin leaned back in his chair and refilled his glass. This little encounter was costing me an awful lot of whiskey. These 2 bottles might not get me through the weekend after all. Well, I certainly believe the last one, he said. I frowned, not understanding the joke. Then I got it, and shrugged. And Penny? He asked. She said one of those goons was following her, had been for a couple of weeks. Came to see if I could find out why. So, you're a private eye. No, sir, I said. Private investigators are licensed by the state and city and require registration and bonding. No, sir, I simply provide freelance services to folks when they need them. I'll mow your lawn for $3.50 if you like. He looked at me sideways. Sorry, you looked like the kind of gentleman that might have a lawn, I said. So, which one was it? I cocked my head at the question and squinted at him. Following her. Which one of these guys was following Penny around? Oh, I said and took a swig of bourbon. That one. I nodded at the body closest to us. The other one's a Fed. What? Devin shouted. A Fed? You killed a fucking federal agent? Again he tried to jump up. Better this time, but, the foot. So he was back in his seat just as quickly. One more drink and he wouldn't feel a thing. Hush, I whispered. Keep your voice down. No, of course I didn't kill him. Devin took a deep breath and seemed to calm down a bit. Okay, well, then, who did? Well, I said. Yeah, okay, I killed him, but in my defense, I didn't know he was a Fed at the time. This didn't seem to assuage his feelings on the matter. Jesus Christ! Well, why did you kill them? Well, come on, They did try to kill me first, I said, gesturing at the bullet holes in the wall in my kitchen. I was just standing here, minding my own business, trying to make some goddamn eggs for breakfast. I mean, I made coffee and everything. Real coffee, too, not just Kahlua heated up. So why were they trying to kill you? He asked, clearly trying to find the end to this loop. I don't know. Well, what did Penny say? Nothing. Nothing? Nope. Jesus Christ. I know, I said. Well, you were out all day. What did you find out? He asked. Discount store has shower curtains for $9. His jaw kind of dropped at that, and it made me smile. What the hell, Church? You're an investigator. No, sir. I told you very clearly I'm a helper. But you're supposed to be helping Penny, he whined. No, I'm not. You said she came here to hire you. Right, I agreed. So then you're working for her. No, I'm not. She didn't hire me. He looked baffled. Why not? He asked. Because I already killed the guy, I said, growing exasperated with the conversation. He groaned. Well, then that probably wasn't the best business decision, was it? He was being condescending now, and I wasn't in the mood, seeing as how I still had 2 dead bodies to get rid of that night, and he was still drinking up all my whiskey. Obviously, I didn't know who he was when I killed him, I said. Oh, so good judgment all over the place in here then. I refilled my glass and sat silently, drinking and smoking. So, you don't even care who he is then? Devin asked finally. I sighed and looked at the body. Not for free, I don't, I lied. He rolled this around for a bit, then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a long billfold and opened it. How much for the whiskey? He asked. The whiskey? I repeated. That I drank. How much was it? His words were beginning to slur a bit, and I could tell the pain in his foot was drifting from his mind. I rolled my eyes up, pretending to do the math in my head. The bottle was $15, I said, exaggerating a little bit. He coughed and smacked his lips, looking disgusted. He reached in and pulled out some bills. He paid me for the whiskey and the curtains, too. I don't suppose you want to help me get him wrapped up and out of here, I said. He rolled his eyes and stood up slowly and carefully, then straightened his tie. How much to figure it out? He asked. It took me a minute to understand. The guy? I asked. He nodded. $50 a day, I said, halfway between a question and a statement. He seemed to be mulling it over, looking around my place and then scoping me out. Plus expenses, obviously, I added. Are you considering bourbon an expense? He said sarcastically. Do I look like I work sober? I wasn't kidding. There was a long pause while he stared at me. Then he opened back up his wallet and pulled out more cash. $250. That's a week's advance. Have something by then, or you're fired. You really care that much? I asked. She's my girl, he said, and limped out the door. The door closed and I very nearly squealed. It had been forever since I'd had that much cash all at once. I'm not kidding. I honestly couldn't remember the last time I had more than $100 in hand. Now, counting the cash Devin had given me for the whiskey and the shower curtains, I had almost 300 clams and they were already on fire, burning a hole in my pocket. I also had a case, so that meant I needed to get some sleep. With real work to do, I would want to be out of bed before noon the next day, and it was starting to get late. Plus, I still had these bodies to take care of. I stuck $100 bill in an envelope and scribbled my name and apartment number on it and pinned it to the wall next to the door. $100 should almost catch me up on my back rent, and at the very least postpone my eviction for a couple weeks. The rest of the cash I folded and stuck in my pants. Then I turned my attention to the chore I'd been putting off all day. I opened the shower curtains and laid the first one out on the floor. I rolled the first guy off the rug and positioned him square in the center of the plastic sheet. The curtain was too short to fit the guy without his feet hanging out, so I had to get a little creative. I spun the guy on the diagonal, which was easier than you would expect now that he was on a brand new sheet of slippery plastic. Once positioned, I folded the short corners over his face and feet and one of the long corners over his body. Then I just rolled him up like a giant dead goon burrito. The second guy was even easier now that I had my technique down. I lined them up next to each other and inspected my work. It was good. Not great, but it was dark out and people didn't tend to hang out in the alleys at night in this part of town. I had forgotten the twine to keep them wrapped up, but I had some duct tape wrapped around the drain pipe in my kitchen sink to fix a small quarter-size hole that had rusted through a few months back. So I pulled about a 6-foot length of that off and split it in two. I taped the outside corners of the curtain and picked up one of the bodies to make sure it held. I dragged the wrapped up corpses, one at a time, out into the hall, then back down to the back door and out onto the back stairs. I wasn't about to carry them down 2 flights of stairs, so I just heaved them up over the rail and dropped them onto the pavement. The good thing about them having been dead most of the day already was that they didn't really bleed when their heads cracked on the asphalt. I popped the trunk on my cruiser and dumped the bodies in, then slammed it shut. I went back up to my apartment, took a good long guzzle of bourbon from the plastic bottle, and grabbed the envelope from the wall. I locked up and made my way back down to my car, removed the boot, turned the engine over, and drove off to find a good place to dump the bodies. I know the river seems like a good place to dump meat bags. It's what you see in the pictures, and it's got a certain romance to it, I suppose, if that's how your heart works. The truth is, it's awful. Bodies float, and trying to weigh them down in deep water is a hopeless task. However you try, the weight will separate quickly from the stiff, and then your departed friend is like an airline seat cushion. Also, rivers have current, which makes floaty things move around. Invariably, the body will wash up on shore, dry out in the sun, and perfectly preserve all that beautiful evidence. You'll be in cuffs in less than a week. No, what you want is a lonely place with shallow standing water, something knee-deep in a place where people don't come to picnic. I had a place I'd used before. Not recently, mind you. That's the other thing. You can't be dropping bodies in the same place week after week. Really? You shouldn't be dropping bodies anywhere week after week. If you have a scheduled body disposal day, it's probably time to spend a few hours reevaluating your life. That said, I try not to be too judgmental. I mean, I had 2 rotters in my trunk at one time, so I wasn't, generally speaking, on the solidest of moral ground to begin with. Anyway, I had a spot near J. Percy Priest Dam. It's about a mile from the Tennessee Women's Prison, which, unsurprisingly, is how I found the location in the first place. I got a lot of exes living in that joint, so I'm out that way from time to time. I have what you might call questionable taste in women. I guess I'd call it that too, but I swear it's not intentional. They all seem so normal at the start. I'm just putting that out there because, well, let's face it. You don't need a black belt and cliche to see where this shit is going. So yeah, large rocky banks, shallow still water, and generally unattended. The bodies would be found eventually, but in my experience it would take a few weeks or possibly even months. That's what you want. You want time. You want the body all the way underwater, face down in the mud, eyes and mouth open if you can. You want entry points is what I'm saying. In these situations, bugs and small fish are your best friends. When I got there, there was a car leaving, but whoever it was didn't seem to take any notice of me. I parked and sat in my car for a while, probably 20 minutes, just to make sure the place stayed empty. It was a beautiful night, not a cloud in the sky, and far enough from downtown to let you see the stars. I got out and stood a few yards from the engine and listened. The place was empty. Only the sound of water moving through the dam could be heard. I got back in and rolled the car as close to the water as I could, then popped the trunk and pulled out the bodies and dragged them one at a time down to the water. You want exposure, so they needed to be unwrapped. I unrolled the two goons and carried the crumpled shower curtains back to the car and stuffed them in the trunk. I spaced the bodies about 50 feet apart in the water and piled some of the larger stones from the banks on top of them for weight and cover. Once the physical labor was done, I sat on the rocks near the water for a bit to catch my breath. I lit a cigarette and noticed blood on the cuffs of my white button-down shirt. "Fuck," I whispered. The shirt and tie came off on the way back to the car, and I stuffed them into the wadded-up curtains in the trunk, then drove away. I stopped at a bar on the way into town and threw the shower curtain and the clothes into their dumpster out back, then wound my way back to my place. Still no heat scoping out the place as best I could tell, which I actually found odd. Surely the Fed would be seen as missing by now, at least within his department. And while I doubted that his associates would have any reason to suspect him dead, I also figured that they knew where he'd been, and if he wasn't checking in, they'd be checking up. Still, I had nothing to complain about if they weren't, so I stuck my car in the alley, threw on the boot, and headed up to catch whatever sleep I could before I had to be out in the working man's world. So hey, that was chapter 1 of bishopCHURCH. You can read it on www.gavingale.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at @WriteGavinGale. Also, make sure to pick up Dark White on Amazon. Kindle version is only 99 cents right now. Absolutely no excuse not to pick it up and check it out. We're just getting started here on Writing in Real Life. We've got lots of things to cover, lots of reading and writing to do. So go ahead and, click that subscribe button. I don't care about the bell. Fuck the bell. I don't need the bell. Click the subscribe button. That's what I care about. Head to gavingale.com. Check out stories. Check out the blog that I'm terrible at keeping up on, but I will try to be better. And just tune in back here as often as you can. I'm going to be putting up stuff. Until then, folks, as I always say, write when you can.